All right, all right. Welcome back to the world-famous Tipitinas. We are here with a very special guest today, someone that I don't exactly know how to introduce outside of saying saloon keeper of the Maple Leaf Bar on Oak Street, also what I like to call the mayor of a neighborhood referred to as Oaksterdam, maybe. I don't know if you ever heard that before. Ladies and gentlemen, Hank Staples.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome. It's nice to have you here. So we were talking just briefly a few minutes ago. You are not originally from New Orleans. You are from the D.C. area.
That's right. Born and raised in Washington, D.C., and there is a strong D.C. connection to New Orleans. Of course, a couple of the Tipitina's ownership is from the D.C. area.
Jeffrey and Robert.
Right. And then, of course, you go back many years. On Oak Street, back in the day, there was a notorious music club called Jed's, which was right across the street from the Maple Leaf. Jed's had some great acts over the years. Meatloaf played there.
Meatloaf played there, huh?
Yeah, Meatloaf played there. A lot of national acts. There weren't many at the time. Tips was, when Jed's was in its heyday, Tips popped up and then had its first death, and Jed's was still, hanging in there.
How big? What was the capacity? I guess for Jed's.
It's
how much do you think they could squeeze in there? I guess is the better question.
Well, I would say that Jed's is not even half the size of Tips.
Not even half the size.
Not even half the size.
Are you talking about just the downstairs? Not even half the downstairs.
Well, okay. They had an upstairs also. It was sort of a mini version of Tips.
Okay.
And they had an upstairs. It was a full floor, and Jed had taken out the floor so that it was sort of like upstairs courtyard. You could go upstairs and you could hang around the edges and see the music. And he really got a lot of excellent national acts, and of course there simply wasn't the same type of touring circuit that there is today.
What years are you talking about here, roughly?
Well, Jed started in the early 70s.
Okay.
He started, I think he started a year or two before the Maple Leaf. Maple Leaf opened in December of 73.
It was 73? Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's that was the real date they opened. Officially,
First
it was...
show was 74, though, huh? Is that right?
Yeah. What happened was, this wouldn't happen today. When they were getting their permits, there was a state office downtown, and the lady at the state office had said, well, you've been approved for the permit, but it hasn't come in yet. But you go ahead and open. You're okay. Nobody's going to check.
No one will check, of course.
So they opened in December of 73, even though officially they weren't supposed to till the permit arrived. And it came a few weeks later.
All right.
So the official opening is in 74, but they actually were,
open for business.
Slinging drinks in 73, late 73. I think the license came in the first or second week of February, 74. So.
Right. So, sorry. Back to Jed's. They opened a couple years earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Palmer grew up around the corner from me in Washington, D.C. We lived, our backyards faced each other.
Wow.
And Jed was like the Darth Vader of, any place he went, he was Darth Vader.
In what respect?
He was the Dark Force.
Okay.
You know.
Right.
And in the movie, in Star Wars, of course, but right before he dies, he becomes, warm and cuddly. Not true with Palmer. It's funny because when I first came to Oak Street, I kept hearing these stories about Jed and Jed Palmer, and so finally I said, there was a guy in my neighborhood in D.C. when I was growing up, and it sounds a lot like him, and but Jed had created this myth about, where he was from and stuff.
What was he telling people?
He had this background from Mississippi, and I mean, that's where his mom was from.
Okay.
You know, and she came from a little bit of money, and his father had been an attorney for the United States Senate. He had something to do when Lyndon Johnson was the majority leader. Mr. Palmer had a fairly prominent job with the United States Senate for the Democrats.
Okay.
And, you know, being from D.C., it was like being from Hollywood, you know, except instead of people in the film business, you knew people in politics.
Gotcha.
And, yeah, Jed, he was the neighborhood bad boy. And then when I came to New Orleans many years later, he's still the neighborhood bad boy.
All right, well, like you said, you're from D.C. What were the music venues around D.C. that you kind of came up hanging out at? Where was the hot music for you?
I never had money to go see anybody real, but there was a music scene there, and of course there was a joint on Tenley Circle called Mr. Henry's,
All right.
and they had live music almost every night.
Did you like that? Being your real name is Henry, I guess?
Oh, well, I liked
Pretend like you're related to the guy or something?
I liked it because I could get served there when I was underage. And I couldn't get, in D.C. At the time, I don't know what it is today, but in those days, it was 18 for beer and wine and 21 for liquor.
Gotcha.
So I could go there and get beer. And, you know, it was funny how the game was played. I would get turned down by certain people. And so you would find somebody that would serve you, and if you went there enough to where you would become sort of a regular, at a certain point, even though the other guy knew you weren't old enough, because the others were serving you, it was like they would be like,
why should I pass up on the money now?
Exactly, right. So I was able to sort of, you know, get on the okay at Mr. Henry's. And they had decent, you know, bands for what it was. They didn't have the music tradition, of course, like New Orleans.
No. It certainly has its own thriving scene for sure.
Yeah, but it was live music. I've always loved it. So drinking and live music, two things I've really enjoyed.
Well, speaking of really enjoying drinking and live music, so your journey to New Orleans is actually a pretty interesting one. You were not originally ever planning on living in New Orleans, but you ended up living in New Orleans. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I'd been living in New York City, and I was there for 7 years, and I was very young when I first moved there. And, you know, for the first 2 or 3 years, it was an enormous playground. It was fascinating. And, you know, and when you're that young, I guess I was about 19 when I got there, or 20, whatever, you know, you can put up with a lot.
Yeah.
And so terrible places to live, terrible jobs and all that, but, you know, you're just enjoying the wild, you know, the fascinating New York life. And I saw no real future for myself in New York except as an apartment slave, because there was at one point when $100 a week was a lot of money, or a good raise. There were about 3 years where every year I made $100 a week more than the previous year.
Excellent. Yeah.
Well, the only difference in my life was I got a better apartment.
No.
And that was it. Apartment was more expensive, but better. After a while, I saw no real future for me in New York. I was like, you know, I was working in an industry I didn't really.
What industry was it?
I worked in photographic printing.
Okay.
And so, you know, I worked at some of the best labs in New York, so I got to meet legends of photography, but still, it's like, it was fun while I was learning it, but then at a certain point, it wasn't really what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I had bought a little property on Long Island, and I was able to almost triple my money in just a couple of years. And somebody came to me and said, you know, I have a buyer if you're interested. And it was like, I cashed my chips in, as they say. And I didn't work for an entire year.
Oh.
And I traveled around for a little bit, but my younger sister had said, I think you should check New Orleans out. You'd like it, and I think you might do well there.
But it still wasn't even your destination that you were headed to, was
No.
it?
No, actually, you get really stupid ideas when you're young. I had seen I think it was a 60 Minutes, but it was about a guy who had showed up in Central America, and he had a chunk of money. And he ended up selling weapons to the Contras and made a lot of money. And I saw that thing on television, and I thought, that guy he comes across as really stupid. I could do better than him.
I'm not stupid. I could do this.
I could do that better than him. So I was planning to go down there and check it out, and I never made it. Thank
Yeah.
God.
No kidding, thank God. Or, I mean, you missed out,
Well, who knows? Yeah,
Could've missed out. You
I
could've.
might have been able to afford a shirt with sleeves,
On your way to become a gun runner in Central America, you happened upon New Orleans. I mean, obviously your sister had said, hey, check it out. And if I'm not mistaken, aside from Jed, you knew other people that were in the area too. Is that right?
Well, I ran into people. When I got to town, I didn't know anybody.
Oh, okay.
And I tell you what, in many ways, New Orleans is a much better place than it was then. But my God, it was fascinating and fun, and it was so cheap. I mean, it's mind-boggling how cheap it was back then.
Yeah.
Well, I was here a year and a half where I really didn't do much of anything except, and run around to bars and restaurants and shows and clubs,
Who were some of the first musicians that you crossed paths with when you first got here?
Well, let's see. Well, it's funny. A guy who lived upstairs at Tipitina's,
Yeah.
Red Priest, because he was playing at the Maple Leaf all the time.
Okay.
And they weren't really, famous national. They were just good local guys who hung out at the club a lot. Walter Washington. Unfortunately, James Booker he died before I got to town, but he played at one point twice a week at the Maple Leaf.
Absolutely.
But I never met him.
But obviously, when you started working at the Maple Leaf, you were around all these people who had obviously known him quite well. Are there any stories about Booker that maybe we haven't heard already, like in the Bayou Maharaja movie? If you haven't seen Bayou Maharaja, by the way, it's phenomenal. A great, the following the tale of James Booker's life. But were there any stories or anything that maybe we haven't heard?
Well, the story that it doesn't really come up much, but it's fascinating in that Booker worked at. This is so long ago. There were no computers. I mean, well, there were. There was one computer at City Hall, to my knowledge, and it took up like half a floor.
Yeah.
And they had these huge reels. It was like, for the movie Ben-Hur, it would be like, and it was on, these reels of tape. They didn't have computers with word processors and all that, and they had a typing pool. And James, so there was a fella who was the chief economist for the city of New Orleans. His name was Lee Madare. And Lee lived 2 blocks from the Maple Leaf. He was a regular at the Maple Leaf and at Jed's and all the neighborhood joints. But he was also a very good economist. He was, very friendly with Booker and just fascinated by him because Booker was just so different.
Yeah.
And at one point when Booker became permanently homeless, Lee put him up at his house. And then when Booker had gotten so unreliable as far as showing up for his gigs, he was pretty much fired from every joint in town that he had been, working at. Lee hired him as a typist at City Hall. And like I say, back in those days, they had a typing pool, and people would take their stuff over, and there'd be this row of typists.
30 people, all
and
one behind the other.
You have to understand that this is when City Hall was just being integrated. It was in Dutch Morial's first term. Moon had started the integration of City Hall, Moon Landrieu. But it's still, it had some of these typists. They were these white ladies in their 60s, and they had never been really around black males.
Well, aside from just being a black guy, James Booker is quite the character.
Well, yeah,
to say the least.
Let's just say, we'll forget black male. We'll say heroin addicts. I don't think they'd been around any heroin addicts. Gay men.
Yeah, very few openly homosexual people.
That's
sure.
right. Well, Lee put Booker into the typing pool, and this is what I heard. I wasn't
You weren't there. So.
But I heard, he would show up at all different times, and so Booker was the only one at the pool who really had flexible work hours, and which annoyed the other people because they didn't have the same privilege. And he was a pretty good typist, from what I understand, but the manual dexterity for playing the piano and for typing must be similar. Sometimes towards the end, he would show up loaded.
Yeah.
And God knows on what. I mean, because he did so many different things. He drank heavily, but he smoked pot. All that's along with the heroin. So he would start talking just to himself. But sometimes he'd be in his mind. He's arguing with somebody. He's like planning out what he's going to say to somebody.
Yeah.
But these conservative old ladies didn't really understand or get any of that.
Freaked out by this guy talking to himself and having an argument, let alone talking to himself.
Yeah, or he'd say, oh, "You're the bitch tonight," and they had no idea what so it was causing an issue. And this is when Dutch Morial was mayor, and from what I understand, Dutch had called Lee into the office, and he said, "Madame, do something about Booker." There was a utility closet, and Lee cleaned out the utility closet. It held a mop and brooms and stuff. And he put Booker's desk, or he got it into the utility closet, and he had a light bulb put in, and Booker became the only typist at City Hall with his own office. And then there was an incident where caused Booker to be fired. I won't go into the details. But anyway, so James was fired. They cleaned the office out. But, in any bureaucracy, especially a governmental bureaucracy, you never surrender space.
No.
And so Lee immediately put city economic records and financial data into that space. And he had a plaque made which said, this after James died, he had a plaque made that was put on the door that said James Booker Memorial Archives.
That's wonderful.
For many years, they kept economic data in that little cubbyhole, and it had the plaque on the door. And when I worked for a local organization, before I was working at the Maple Leaf, I worked for a local organization called the Bureau of Governmental Research. And it analyzed local tax issues, stuff like that. And I would be at City Hall a lot. And I saw that thing on the door a lot. And it's such a shame. I believe now Homeland Security is on the 9th floor.
So I assume the plaque is gone.
The plaque is long gone.
Yeah.
And if I had known, I would have gotten the plaque.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But it was it had been gone maybe 6 months, and I was at City Hall for some reason. And this was after 9/11, when the Homeland Security got an office in New Orleans. and I had somebody with me, and I wanted to show them the James Booker Memorial Archives.
The archives, yeah.
And it wasn't there, and it was a shame.
Yeah.
I didn't even photo. I wish I'd taken a picture of it.
Yeah.
So,
I wonder if there is a picture of it.
I'm sure there is, but
Yeah.
Nobody really realizes, hey, the story behind it.
No, it's a ridiculous, like, it's someone who wouldn't know that story, like, what, off chance that someone working at City Hall knows who James Booker is as well, to happen upon that and be like, I wonder why someone has their name on a closet as a memorial archive.
Well, that's right, and they would think, was he, some kind
a
of
councilman or,
right, yeah,
something.
Yeah, not a, phenomenal musician who was a crazed junkie,
That was only there just to stop annoying the other people in the typing pool.
Right.
No, that's great. So, when you came to town, you weren't immediately starting at the Maple Leaf. When did you start working at the Maple Leaf?
The Bureau of Governmental Research, it was a private organization. It didn't get government money, and it was having funding problems. So they had to cut way back on staff, and I was one of the people who was laid off. And at the time, I was living in the same apartment I'm living at now on top of the Maple Leaf Bar.
So when did you move into that apartment?
It was in 85. I guess it was in early summer of 85.
Okay.
Everett Maddox, the poet, and his brother Bill had the apartment, and they were having trouble paying the $200 a month rent, utilities included. There's a back.
It's hard for a poet in the 80s, I guess,
Yeah.
And a brother, yeah.
Well, the brother was, he actually was working as a bartender and was making decent enough money, but he when he moved in there, he had no intention of paying any rent.
Oh, gotcha.
So there was a back porch, and they leased me the sofa bed on the back porch. So I was staying on the back porch, and I was paying Bill and Everett, maybe it was as much as $100.
Yeah.
But and they didn't turn a penny of it over to Carl Brown, who owned the building.
Oh, man.
I lose my job at the BGR, but Carl Brown, who owned the building and was a 25% partner in the Maple Leaf, but he was the one who was running it. He had a thing where employees of his, he liked renting to them because,
you have them under your thumb.
Yes.
You're in charge of where they live and where they work.
That's right. That's it exactly. And he also knew that I paid the rent and the others weren't.
Gotcha.
So he offered me a job as a bartender. And of course, prior to that, I'd been tending bar across the street at Jed's. But I'd been fired from that job.
What for? Can you share that?
You
don't have to incriminate yourself or anything if it's a bad story, but
it
sounds like a good one already.
There was a night when a crew of us got absolutely hammered, and we're all bartenders. At some point, I don't know why, but somebody decided that whatever it was, Germans or whatever, were trying to conquer the back bar.
What?
So we were using Heineken bottles as grenades to kill the Germans. There was a lot of alcohol involved. So the next day I was, fired. I would fire myself.
How many times have you had to fire someone for doing that at the Maple Leaf, I guess?
Well, 0.
0? Oh, okay. That's lucky then.
We have a strong defense system, and the Germans wouldn't dare try to.
No, you got to watch the Germans. So this is about the same exact year that the Crew of Oak started as well, isn't it?
Crew of Oak started in 85. Yeah. Terry Tucker created the Crew of Oak. She'd been tending bar since she was probably 17, back when the drinking age was 18. Well, she worked at the original Dream Palace, and
that's now Blue Nile.
Yeah, that's right. and it had been, a couple of incarnations of the Dream Palace. But she'd worked at the original one, which in many ways was as legendary as, say, Jed's. It was a very small place, but it would get these pretty big national acts just because they'd be, going between Atlanta and Houston and would do a gig at wherever was available in New Orleans.
Well, I mean, those are places you could squeeze a couple hundred people into. So that's not, in 1985, that's not exactly a small room. Like, there's only a handful of bands were able to play at the big theaters downtown.
Right. Yeah, really, it was pretty rare that the bands were even playing, like, theaters.
Yeah, they wouldn't take rock bands
right.
at the fancy places.
Yeah, so Terry Tucker started the Crew of Oak, and of course, people think it's named for Oak Street, where it's headquartered, but Oak stood for outrageous and kinky. And
set the record straight right here, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah.
I was the third king of Oak, but I was.
Robustus the third.
That's correct. The king is Robustus, which is Latin for oak, and my term as king was notable because I had an anatomically correct queen. Prior to me, the queens had all been males. Prior to my reign. And so the first queen was Don Brady, and he was, flamboyantly gay, and he was a drama professor at Loyola University. So the first queen was a drama queen.
That's perfect. Perfect.
And the second queen was Eddie Hip, and Eddie was not gay. And he was...
But a good sport nonetheless.
He was a good sport. The joke was, he was extremely masculine, and it took a lot of convincing, but Terry was able to convince him to be queen.
So who was your queen?
My queen was Charlene Quinlan, who was, a neighborhood girl and just, liked to party.
All right, that's fair. That's cool. I share a little bit of the history for the mere fact that my wife was queen a few years back.
Well, that's right, yes.
So I got to be a royal pillow.
That's, yeah. We won't say what your position was.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm the royal porker, not pillow.
You were the pork boy.
Pork boy. I'm
right.
sorry. We can say it. Doesn't matter. Nick will bleep this all in
I didn't
post.
want
you can
to,
say whatever you want.
have
Don't forget to
cross
beep
some kind of Jewish
boy.
line,
I hadn't even considered how trafe that is.
Yeah.
Even that whole year, no one had ever even made me think of that once.
Well, when it was being discussed, I said, you all understand, Tank is Jewish. But we felt that...
by birth, not so much in practice.
We felt like a tradition was, that's what it is. So
that's fair.
And it's the pork does not refer to swine. It refers to a sexual act.
Yeah.
So
yeah, more salami than ham. That's for sure. Yeah.
Correct.
All right. Is there any more of the mythology or anything about the Crew of Oak that you can share, or is it little close guarded?
Off the top of my head, nothing is popping up immediately. It's just a fun event. It's sort of like a smaller version of the Mom's Ball.
Well, the early years, though, it was a small event. It was only dozens of people in those first few years.
That's right.
And to think how it's grown now, the Mardi Gras parade, again, and the Midsummer Mardi Gras parade, thousands of people.
That's right.
Are lining the streets for this crew of misfits
right.
that are outrageous and kinky, and the costumes do not lie.
Yeah, the costumes, the Midsummer Mardi Gras, so the Crew of Oak has 2 events a year. And there's a parade and ball Carnival Week. It's always on the Friday before Mardi Gras. And the reason is that was kind of the only available date because Saturday was the Mom's Ball, and at least half the crew was in the Mom's organization. And Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, people were just too involved with the other events of Carnival.
Yeah.
So the Friday was a natural. So it's the winter event is the Friday before Mardi Gras. We call it Vendredi Gras. And then the second event is in the summer, and it's called Midsummer Mardi Gras. And that it's sort of like Mardi Gras. It's not on a specific date. It moves around every year. It's a different weekend every year.
Typically late August, but more specifically, the last parade in New Orleans before Katrina as well.
That's right. The night before Katrina hits, Crew of Oak paraded, and the previous year, it had been thousands that were involved, and the night before Katrina, it was probably 200 people. But
Frenchie was the king that year, right?
That's right. Yeah, and the artist formerly known as Frenchie.
What's he known as now?
Well, Frenchie.
He's currently known as Frenchie.
Yeah, he's
formerly.
just low key right now.
I've been seeing him. He's been donating some paintings for us, and we've auctioned them off. So
yeah,
he's been a great friend and ally during these times for sure.
He's a very big supporter of the live music
live
scene.
music, yeah. I mean, that's where he gleaned his teeth.
Yeah. Yeah. So we paraded the night before Katrina, and it was about 200 people, and everybody who was leaving was able to get out of town safely and everything else. But I would say easily a third of the people were staying. So, and but I remember marching back. We marched through the neighborhood and marching back to the Maple Leaf. At a certain point, I was one of them. I was probably leading them. We took off, started running because it was raining. The rain was coming in bands, and a band would come in, and then it would stop completely, and the wind would stop blowing. But then another band would come in, only this time more rain, and the wind was stronger. And so at a certain point, there was no longer a little marching parade. Everyone just took off running to get back inside.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a fun night.
If you wouldn't mind telling me a little bit about those first days and weeks after Katrina, like coming off of, I mean, we all, by now, everyone knew it was coming. It was, literally 24 hours from hitting the shores.
Well, I'll tell you what, there was a crew of us at the Maple Leaf, and I still remember one of the neighborhood fellas, Pat Moore, he'd grown up around the corner from the Leaf. His family was from Carrollton going way back. Anyway, Pat comes running in and he goes, 17th Street Canal just broke. And I didn't even know what that meant.
Yeah.
But all the people who'd grown up in New Orleans did. And everybody kind of went home. And a lot of people left pretty quickly. But we were listening to the radio and we were hearing, about how the water was rising and everything else. The Maple Leaf was very well supplied with pretty much everything. We had at least 40 cases of water. I had enough food to feed either 40 people for 10 days or 10 people for 40 days.
Yeah.
And, about the one thing I didn't really have, I wasn't well armed. I had somebody had left me an HK-40 with a couple of clips. So, I mean, that'll stop anyone, but
Yeah.
but it's still when you hit that's all you have. That's all I had. And when you realized how bad it was just in the neighborhood, it was like you felt like you were. Everyone else had tons of.
Yeah, people tend to carry a decent amount around a town like this for sure.
Yeah,
and in Carrollton, early 2000s as well too.
And there were especially once I was outside sitting in front of the place when the first store was hit on Oak Street, and it was kind of like it needed for the looters. It needed one person to be first, but once that first window was broken, it was like I mean, then it was like, it was sort of like everybody knew, hit all the stores or whatever.
Wow.
So that was worrisome. And then seeing the people just walking back and forth, with just stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I was worried about us, but basically people weren't going to go near a place that had somebody.
No, the stores were empty. No one was living at the store above the stores or
Right.
anything like that.
Yeah, there
and
was.
obviously there's fear because you have a bar full of liquor that anyone.
That's what I was worried about. But it's kind of funny because the original Maple Leaf sign was blown down during the storm,
Mm-hmm.
and so there was nothing identifying the place as a bar.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I was sitting outside with a gun, and I realized later that because I saw when people walked by, they all walked on the other side of the median line in the street,
Mm.
and at the time I was like, I didn't get it, but I thought about it, and it's like, yeah, they didn't want to be near the guy with the gun.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just me. We always had at least two others there.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to, one of the things we had told was if it looked like there was a bunch coming down that looked rowdy, like, and there's several of them, I would, somebody would have to go to the back and they'd have to, yell, like, where is blah, blah, whatever. And then what they were supposed to do was, they'd say, like, where's the distilled water? And I'd say, I'd yell, it's over in the corner of the walk-in. And then they were supposed to yell back, where? And I'd say, it's by the AK-47, you ass. And, he was supposed to convey that there was lots of guns there.
Yeah, we have lots of guns. Please continue walking.
Yeah, it's behind the AK. You won't see it because all the other AKs are in front of it.
Well, you guys lost your roof at the bar, is that correct?
Yeah.
And we're one of the first people to come back with some live music with no electricity, no running water, just powering the stage with a generator.
Yeah.
And who was the first show back?
Well, we called them the MREs because, the MREs, for a while there, when we were running low on food, the military was coming through every day, and they would be throwing MREs off the truck. And, of course, we would take as many as we could and take them to the back because we were also distributing them to people who showed up.
Mm-hmm.
So it was called the MREs, and it was Walter Wolfman Washington was of course, the lead.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was a bunch of guys. Let's see, Andy Ambrose was in that. He put the band together. Thomas McDonald. Anyway, it was 5 guys,
Mm-hmm.
and they all knew Walter's tunes.
Yeah.
And I still remember when Walter went into the standard first song he plays at every show. It was so many people started crying, and I say, there was quivering lips, hand holding, and tears, and that was just the men.
Yeah. No, it was a special thing. It was one of the places where at least the people that were the regulars of the neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
where they're cleaning out their houses or their friends' houses or wherever, trying to do whatever they can. At night, it was the place that they can come and commiserate together.
And then a lot of people, at that point, people were allowed into New Orleans, but there was a curfew, and they also, they'd have to leave. You could come in and clean your house, and then you had to leave.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of people who came in for the show, but were still going to leave pretty early.
Mm-hmm.
And the police, National Guard shut us down.
Yeah. Were you guys back up 7 nights a week almost immediately?
Well, it wasn't 7 nights. It was very hard finding musicians.
Yeah.
We'd have to I did a lot of I spent a lot of time arranging rides, and then there were several acts where it was kind of like 3 guys and then 1 or 2 other guys. You know,
Yeah.
in other words, the 3 guys were kind of the same, and then but one of the other 2 guys, it would be called his band, so that like we were hoping people would see that it was different.
Yeah.
And but you know, the set list was kind of the same.
Just playing the standards. mostly.
Yeah. New Orleans R&B, and you know, and Mardi Gras tunes. Lots of Mardi Gras tunes.
Compared to back when you first moved to town and where we are today, describe how much Oak Street has changed. It's changed a lot, and I'm not just talking about the paving of the street and the regeneration in about 2007, 2008 when they tore up your blocks, and those are more stories I want to get to also. But in general, to describe Oak Street then versus now.
We had some neighborhood guys that were very old, and there were several that were born in the 1890s.
Wow.
And so they had seen, they could remember when at the parish line it was farms. You know, none of those houses were there. And there were a couple that were born in the 1880s. They could remember when Carrollton was electrified, you know.
Wow.
And by the time I came around, the guys from the 1880s were gone. But there were several from the 1890s. Well, there was Mr. O'Brien. He had run the... back in those days, Oak Street had a funeral home, and Maple Street had a funeral home. And I believe that Mr. O'Brien's funeral home, he was the owner, and the main undertaker, was on Maple Street. But he had buried at least half the people who, you know, in Carrollton when they died. You know? And towards the end of his life, he pretty much just had a routine where he went out and hit. He'd start out at Madigan's because they opened up at like 1 p.m. And then he would, you know, he'd be at Carrollton Station, he'd be at Muddy Waters or Jed's, he'd be at the Maple Leaf. And I used to run it. I got to talking to him. I loved hearing about, you know, when there were horses in the neighborhood and, you know, there was no electricity, stuff like that. So.
Well, albeit they were very old, obviously, but from when you moved here, describe from the 80s, what was it like in the 80s? There wasn't a yoga studio. There wasn't, you know, fancy coffee.
Oh, no, that's right. Yeah, I mean...
I'm not trying to bash any current business. I just want to, you know, get a snapshot. What were some of the businesses and, you know, just generally the differences?
Well, you know, there was really almost no activity past Cambronne Avenue to the parish line because it was extremely dangerous. The crime was horrendous. So
yeah, that's the third block, just in case anyone doesn't realize.
That's right, yeah. There were still 5 blocks of nothing between Cambronne and the parish line. And there was where Giacomo's is now was a great restaurant. It was Cafe Savannah. And
my mother-in-law used to work there.
Oh, okay.
I believe.
Well, that's right. Yes, she did. Of course, I ended up buying it, and then I sold it to Jack, who opened Giacomo's at the location. And then, of course, there was Jed's, which later became Muddy Waters, which was a music club. And there wasn't a lot on Oak Street. It was really in just a kind of a real decline.
Yeah, I moved here in 2000, and I feel like there was the Chinese restaurant on the first block, and a coffee place, and a dry cleaner, and obviously there was a hardware store on the other side, which is now the yoga studio. That's, you know, those are the only thing. And the Super 10, I think, has been there or was there for a long time.
It was, well, the Super 10 had been a Woolworths, and it's funny because today I mentioned Woolworths, and most people look at me like, "What's that?" But when I was a kid, it was called the Woolworths 5 and 10.
Mm-hmm.
And when my dad was a kid, everything in there pretty much cost a nickel or a dime.
Yeah.
And it was still called the 5 and dime or whatever. But it was just an inexpensive department store, except it had a lot of stuff. I mean, you could get all kinds of school supplies, and like a department store wouldn't sell that.
Yeah.
But it was kind of an all-purpose store. It had some clothes. They were really cheap and poor quality. But it would have school supplies. It would have lots of stuff that you know, it would have kitchen supplies, all of that. So that was, there was a Woolworths. Oak Street was probably very much like it had been 100 years earlier, because it had been the main commercial strip for the town of Carrollton. And, you know, in the neighborhood, there was a post office. It was very handy to have the post office. God, I'm trying to remember where it was at, and it closed, I guess, in early '86.
Yeah.
But it was very handy having a post office. It was the littlest post office you ever saw, and it had two shoe stores right across the street from each other.
I was gonna say the shoe store, Giacomo's, and the Maple Leaf are the only things that are still there that were there when I first moved here. So.
Well, it was funny because they had two shoe stores and they had two shoe repair places, and it's like these days. I mean, I don't know. Most people don't get their shoes repaired; they throw them away.
Yeah, I don't know a lot of people that are training to become a cobbler.
Right.
You know, it's not very popular anymore.
And it was like, I liked Oak Street back then because it was like going back in time. You know, they didn't just have a cobbler; they had two of them.
Yeah, yeah.
And they had at least one seamstress, and it was like, how much work is there for a seamstress?
Well, obviously some, you know.
Well, also, you know, back then for Carnival, I think.
Yeah, they would probably make the bulk of their income from the year just in 6 or 8 weeks.
That's right. That's right. Or with some of them, they'd work on that stuff for 9 months.
Yeah, if they get hired by a crew or a float or something. Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, today it's much bigger business, and you know, there's more ways for carnival organizations to buy their stuff.
There's a little less hand craftsmanship for sure. Yeah, which is sad, but it's understandable. It's the way of
it's
how
the
things
way
go.
it is. Yeah.
I mentioned before when the street was torn up. I remember having a lot of interesting, fun nights hanging out on Oak Street when no cars are driving past, and there's torn up asphalt and gravel and everything else. And I've heard fun stories of things I didn't get to participate in, like bowling down Oak Street into glass bottles. And I definitely ate dinner at Giacomo's outside on the street, and then partied inside. There was a little while there, specifically at least for one jazz fest, when I felt like I was there all night, every night, or, you know, at least in the wee hours. Always made my way back to that block, and there were seemingly 500 people wandering just on this one block, let alone the 100 to 200 crammed inside.
I really liked, you know, when the street was closed to...
it's fun, right?
Yeah, to vehicles. Yeah, it was. And I know over time it wasn't, you know, an economic plan that would work.
No.
But
it worked well for, you know...
It did.
For y'all, I guess.
Yeah. And, of course, what people don't realize is at one point there was a streetcar that went on Oak Street. And when they redid the street, they took the streetcar tracks out. And the streetcar tracks had not been visible anyway. The street had just been paved on top of it.
Poor asphalt on top.
Yeah. And, of course, next to the Maple Leaf had been Christiana's Seafood Market. The building now is rented by Giacomo's, and they use it as a dining room.
It's the seaside, as it were.
Right. But, and I'm not sure exactly when this happened. It was sometime in the late 60s, I believe. But anyway, Christiana's had a spectacular balcony that covered the sidewalk.
Over the sidewalk.
Yeah.
All right.
It went all the way to the edge of the curb. Just a beautiful balcony. And I don't know how this happened, but streetcar ran off the streetcar tracks and plowed into Christiana's balcony.
Holy hell. It's the same old lady that lived up there, huh?
Yeah. And destroyed the balcony. And they were given, I believe he told me, 10 grand, which was, you could buy a house for that.
In the 60s? Yeah.
Yeah, in New Orleans. It might not have been that much, but anyway, they were given money pretty quickly, and they just never rebuilt the balcony, which is a shame. They decided, well, hell, let's keep the money.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Oak Street, these days there's almost no balconies left, but you can tell by looking at the buildings which ones had balconies, and most of them covered the entire sidewalk.
Yeah. Well, when they repaved it and put in, the parking lanes, personally, like, I don't know how they could have done it better, but it seems like it's too narrow sometimes, or, it's still a tight street considering it's become a more busy thoroughfare.
Yeah.
It's busy. I mean, obviously up until past 5 months, but it's a very busy thoroughfare. There's a lot of businesses. There's a lot of restaurants. There's a music venue. There's another place that has some live music down the street sometimes.
And then also, these days, a lot of people use it as a shortcut to Jefferson Parish.
Yeah, cut it right over to River Road.
Yeah. And
did you get to have any input at all? Were there the local businesses get to have any say?
Not
on
really.
What they were going to do?
They had a couple of so-called meetings, but
I mean, they put the curbs out in a strange way, and it sticks out a little bit here and not so much there. And
those were designed, and there are these like trends or fads that go into urban design, and that at the time was one of those, and they called them cutouts, and all they do is they would have done better.
They ruin people's tires and rims, is what they do more than anything else.
And it also messed up parking, and so, and that was just a fad in urban planning that has since gone away. But we're stuck with it.
Yeah.
And we didn't lose that many parking places, but in our block, I guess we lost. Well, we did. That one block, I guess we lost 6 or 8 parking places, and that's a fair amount.
Yeah, I guess the one concession is you have about 12 extra feet wide, 3 feet deep in front of the Maple Leaf.
Right.
Which is somewhat of a relief, but still, on a busy night, it might as well be nothing.
Yeah, and for instance, there is an ordinance against congregating outside in front of a bar. There is a municipal ordinance in New Orleans. I've never heard of it being enforced.
No, because I've never heard of this either. This is the first time I'm hearing about that.
But it's kind of funny that they put the cutouts there in front of a bar to encourage something that's violating a civil ordinance. So I never brought that up, but
might as well not bother bringing it up.
Right.
Yeah. Well, one of those things that I think kind of came out of the revitalization or the repaving of Oak Street was Po' Boy Fest.
Yeah.
You guys didn't start. That was after it had been reconstructed. Is that right?
Yeah, and the Po' Boy Fest, it's interesting because it started almost by accident. There was a group that was running the civic affairs of Oak Street at the time, and they became aware of a grant that was available. It was a matching grant. They had to come up with, like, let's say they come up with $2,500, then this grant would match it. and it wasn't even much money involved, but they wanted to get this grant, and they had to come up with a cultural preservation festival or event. And
it had to be a festival or event, but for cultural preservation.
Right.
Okay.
They had no idea what to do. And at one of these meetings, it was before I was involved with the organization, somebody said, there's no more po' boy shops. Why don't we, preserve the po' boy? And they came up with it at the very last minute, and they got the, they got their application in, and they got the grant, and they had to scramble to come up with their matching end of it, because I think that you didn't get the grant until you had already had the first half of the money.
Wow. All right.
And of course, it was a spectacular success. As far as it was,
Right out the gate.
yeah, it was very popular. And they ran it for 2 years, and it was poorly run.
Well, it was run by people that do not do this sort of thing.
That's right.
They don't know how to sell drinks to masses of people or food or organize a line for the
traffic
most part.
flow was the biggest thing. They didn't understand that you have that many people. You want them all sort of like lining up this in by each booth. The line goes the same way, so they're not like bashing into each other.
Yeah, and again, the street is only 15 feet wide.
Right.
So what do you expect?
That's right. And but they didn't even want me participating.
Any reason why?
Mostly it was because I owned a bar.
No.
That was it. They didn't want.
They thought you would take advantage of the situation or something?
No, they thought bars were sleazy, believe it or not. And so, especially after the first year, they immediately saw how popular it was. And in spite of, all the problems, it was an enormous cluster.
Yeah.
And they didn't have enough portalets, all kinds of stuff, you know. But they just saw the volumes of people. And after the first year, they were there was a little group that was they got in their minds that how can we make money off this? Well, after the second year, they were actively conspiring to move it somewhere and charge admission.
Yeah, they wanted to do it at Palmer Park, right?
Right, that's right.
Yeah, move it away from the neighborhood that was supposed to be doing this cultural event. Yeah.
Right. And that was when Ralph Driscoll, who owns an antique shop on Oak Street, and he was involved with all these meetings. He was mostly, he was just an officer on the organization. He was just an Oak Street businessman, but he was interested. He wasn't interested in stealing a Po' Boy Fest. He wanted it to stay on Oak Street.
Yeah.
And he came to me and he said, they're trying to steal the Po' Boy Fest and you have to stop them. But I got Lee Madare, who we mentioned earlier, he'd been the chief economist for the city, but he also was good politically. He had worked for Dutch Morial on all his campaigns, and he knew City Hall inside out, and he knew how to organize a campaign and a lot of stuff. And I went to Lee, and Lee and I came up with a plan to, keep it on Oak Street. Well, they had wanted to move it to Palmer Park, and the Palmer Park Association wanted nothing to do with it.
Yeah, ideally it would ruin their little park,
Right.
essentially.
And
put up stages and music and lots of trash and.
Well, and then of course one of the main things is nobody for blocks around could park.
Yeah, yeah. Where would you park at that intersection? Right?
Yeah, I mean, all the homeowners, they'd be trapped. They'd either have, like, the minute they moved their car, somebody would park there, and they wanted nothing to do with it. And Lee and I came up with the plan to keep it in the neighborhood. Lee had told me, he said, this will end up at the council member's desk. And they count heads.
Yeah.
So go get your petitions signed. And I personally collected the names. And when it ended up in Susan Guidry's office, I had, way over 60 names, and they had 9. And I had affidavits from 2 of the people who had signed mine and their petition, repudiating their signature on the other petition.
That's great.
Because they'd been lied to. They'd been told.
Absolutely.
So they really only had 7. So we stayed on Oak Street.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm glad it did, because that's what kind of gives it its personality. There's no, I mean, let alone food festival. There's no any type of festival like it. At least not that I've seen. Nothing that can. I mean, I know how difficult it is to accommodate the volume, but for the amount of people and sandwiches and drinks and entertainment that gets put out there's nothing else like it.
There used to be more. There aren't that many now. It's one of the very few left that's truly a neighborhood festival.
Absolutely.
They're trying to move these festivals, onto facilities that are set up for festivals or events.
Because it's easy.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it's easy. There's no question why they do it. Like, we would love to do all kinds of things here, but it's not that easy to do it. So.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, if I had a permanent stage or 2 permanent stages, and if I had street power and I had access to 220 power and stuff like that.
Yeah, if you have an open football field, basically, to work with. It
would be way easier to run. But I love having it in the neighborhood. It helps every business on Oak Street. And I still think it has a positive effect on the residents, if nothing else, for home values,
Well, I mean, it has a positive effect, aside from all of those economic reasons, but because people like it and they enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like, who doesn't like a po' boy? If you don't like a po' boy, you can get
That's right.
That's about all I can say about that. Speaking of which, Hank Staples, what is your favorite po' boy? If you were to create the Hank, what would it entail?
Oh, so I'm creating one. See, that's different.
Well, give me both. If you can tell me who's your favorite po' boy that you guys normally get at the festival, I can understand if you don't want to choose a favorite. But if you're creating the Hank, what is on the Hank?
Not one I'm creating, but my favorite po' boy. Really, I can't eat it anymore for health reasons.
Okay.
But it's the deep fried roast beef po' boy at Giacomo's.
That is something else, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, but it's got something like 3,000 calories. It's got the worst combination of fat and carbs.
Or the best, yeah.
Well, that's it, yeah. And who doesn't love gravy? But gravy also has the bad combination of fat and carbs.
Yeah, also.
And so I would say that's my favorite po' boy.
Okay. Well, if you were to create one from scratch, what would it be? Blank slate, not just choosing one that you already love.
Yeah, that's really tough because, for instance, I really love.
Take a sip of wine. Take your time. We're not in a hurry.
Well, let's see. I think I might.
Do you need to switch over?
Well, yeah, I'll go to the Rio.
Oh, I didn't get a second glass for you. If you're going to switch.
That's all right.
All right.
For instance, I really love grilled tuna po' boys. You don't even see them very much.
Grilled tuna? No, I mean,
yeah.
Very rarely do you see anything besides catfish as far as a fish.
Yeah, and or a trout,
Yeah.
I mean, back in the day when Uglasich's was still around, a great restaurant, and they used to have a trout po' boy. My God, that was good.
Yeah.
but they're long gone. Yeah, I really like just a grilled tuna po' boy with, you know, mayo or even better, garlic aioli, you know.
Fancy garlic aioli.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Rockefeller. My goodness.
Well, an oyster Rockefeller po' boy is very good,
Also
too.
very good.
And then, if it's not breaded and deep fried, but it's like grilled in garlic, a soft shell po' boy is really good.
Absolutely. All right. Any more accoutrement, or would that just be the Hank?
Well, it would be,
How about and shut?
it would
add
have
them together.
It's kind of funny, but
The grilled tuna with a soft shell crab.
I really, I'm not a huge mayo person, but on a po' boy, I really like mayo on the po' boy. And
Grilled tuna dressed with a soft shell crab and
yeah,
mayo.
That's right.
That would be the Hank.
Yeah, that would be like the peacemaker, where it's shrimp and oysters.
Yeah.
One side is shrimp, one is oysters.
Yeah, with debris and yeah.
This might be one side is soft shell, one side is tuna.
I mean, I say stack them on top of each other. Why not?
Well, I hadn't thought about that, but that's certainly something to try.
I don't see why not at this point. That's
right.
I think that's what I'm doing for my dinner on Sunday now. I'm gonna have to give that a shot. There's plenty of. I think I had heard that there's plenty of soft shell crab available since so many restaurants are not open. So.
And then every once in a while in town, there's somebody, and they don't do it all the time. It's like for a special on one day or whatever. But whatever it is, a sandwich or whatever, it'll be with house-made mayo.
Yeah.
Well, if I had my choice, there would be house-made mayo and aioli, but that's a lot of work just for a sandwich.
Yeah, just get some Hellman's or some Blue Plate or something,
Right.
Not to talk about food too much, and I don't want to waste any time on it, but you mentioned Giacomo's, the deep fried roast beef po' boy. The Swamp Platter. Familiar with I don't even know if you knew that it's called the Swamp Platter. Are you familiar with that term?
Well, okay, so at one point, before, when I still had the restaurant, we had something called the Swamp Platter. And, it had, it had oysters, it had shrimp, it had alligator, it had frog, it had anything you find in a swamp.
It had anything, but more specifically, just any protein that they're serving in the restaurant, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Swamp Platter wouldn't have, say, lamb, because the lamb isn't found in the swamp.
No.
But, any critter that's mostly aquatic, because an alligator, it's meaty, but it's
found in the swamp.
Yeah, it's in the water most of the time. Yeah, that was something when I had the restaurant. We had a Swamp Platter, and it had, like I say, all those things. I still think it could be a big seller, but
well, it absolutely could be, and if I'm not mistaken, they've revamped what the Swamp Platter is now in the modern age. Since Cafe Savannah is no longer there anymore and Giacomo's has taken over, the Swamp Platter is every different type of meat that they sell all in one plate.
Oh, no kidding. I didn't know that.
All right, well, you and me are going to go have a Swamp Platter when they reopen after
all right,
the break.
that's yeah.
We'll split a Swamp Platter. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Absolutely. Everett Maddox. Tell me a little bit about who he is and his influence and what his legacy is at the Maple Leaf now.
Everett Maddox ran the poetry readings at the Maple Leaf for many, many years, well, until he died. And
Sunday afternoons.
And he was a very, very, very well-read, literate man. He had been, he didn't get his PhD. His unslakable thirst for alcohol had ruined that. And he had gotten, all he had to do was essentially submit his thesis or whatever, your dissertation. He would have gotten it, but he never did.
No.
And, well, he was somebody, he taught poetry in the public school system, and you would think that in some of those tough schools that he was at, that they would eat him alive. I talked to kids over the years who had had him as a teacher and remembered him years later, the way he taught it. They had never had English literature, explained the way he did it.
And came out unscathed, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, he made people love literature. And of course, he continued being the professor at the Maple Leaf when he was the house poet and was basically sleeping on the pool table. And he had guys that could barely read, and they ended up, they would be, discussing The Great Gatsby in detail.
Wow.
And he had decided at a certain point that he was never going to work again, and he stayed true to his word. So he was a homeless poet for the last whatever, at least decade of his life.
But published, is that right?
Well,
was he published while he was alive?
He was published a few times, and of course, I was one of his publishers. For a while, I had a publishing operation, and it was to publish poets in the Maple Leaf Poetry Reading Series. But let's see, was Everett the first one? He might have been the second one, but he was one of the first, writers we published. And he was an interesting guy because until he became a homeless, hopeless drunk, his life was sort of poetic gestures. And a good example of that is there was the early 80s, there'd been a strike. It might have been Teamsters, but anyway, beer delivery drivers were not delivering beer.
Okay.
And there was a shortage of Budweiser. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but but there was a shortage of Budweiser. It had something to do with a labor situation. And Everett, there was one afternoon when he wanted a Budweiser and he couldn't get one, and he used to have these in between a tirade and a tantrum, but he just went ballistic. He at the time had a little red convertible sports car, and he got in his sports car and drove to St. Louis and bought a six-pack.
Drove to St. Louis?
Drove to the Anheuser-Busch place because you could still get it there. He drove to St. Louis, bought a six-pack or maybe two six-packs, and drove back to New Orleans.
He's probably finished with them before he left Missouri.
He was certainly finished with one of them, but okay. I think he brought the other one back to show everyone. And then for years, he had this, we used to call it his unattainable love object, but there was a girl who was going to Tulane at the time, and I don't even know her last name. Her name was Holly, whatever. And he was absolutely smitten with her. On Valentine's Day and her birthday, he would send her roses. And she was from the D.C. area.
All right.
And after she was finished at Tulane, she went back to the D.C. area. And just because of her major and her moving back to D.C., she might have ended up at the CIA because she was a Russian major. And in the D.C. area, your Russian language skills and all that
could get you a job.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I often wondered. I only met her once. And it was after Everett died. I didn't even know her last name. I wanted to contact her. Everett was terrified that she and I would hook up.
Oh, wow.
And so he wouldn't tell me any information about her. After Everett died, he was unable to send her flowers on her on Valentine's Day or her birthday. And so the Valentine's Day came quickly because he died in January. But then when she didn't get them on her birthday, she flew down to New Orleans and came to the bar.
Wow.
So, and I said, yeah, I'm very sorry he died, but I had no way of contacting you. And, yeah, he was interesting. He was extremely literate. He was articulate, but he was as bad a drunk as anyone I've ever seen. And he was homeless the entire time I knew him, except when I gave him a room in the back of my apartment.
Or when you lived on the couch, when he technically was the leasee of the apartment.
It was actually his brother Bill who was.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Everett was there too. And Everett had the couch. That apartment was a real flop house then, and Everett had the couch in the front room. And
is it much better than the couch in the back room?
It was.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so I can tell you this story because it involves James Booker.
Okay.
The couch in the back room, it actually was more like a studio couch, where it could be a bed,
All right.
And it smelled really bad when it was humid. It stunk.
Okay.
And it smelled like puke.
Okay.
Once I heard the story, I used to refer to it when people asked me where I lived. I said, I live in the James Booker Vomit Museum. Because Booker also oftentimes was unable to, get home or whatever. He'd play a gig at the Leaf, or maybe he was just hanging out, whatever. And they'd take him upstairs and put him on the couch in the back, the studio couch in the back porch. And of course, he was on antabuse, and if you, that's a drug to keep you from drinking. But if you're a serious alcoholic, you'll end up taking a drink anyway. But the antabuse mixed with alcohol makes you violently ill. And so Booker would take his antabuse, then he'd start drinking, and he'd end up puking a lot.
All over that sofa.
Yeah, among other places. I didn't know at first. I just knew it smells like puke every time it's past a certain humidity. But then I found out that Booker had spent many nights on that couch, and I was like, okay. I'm sleeping on the junkie vomit.
Yeah, the junkie vomit couch, for sure. Well, the poetry readings that happened at the Maple Leaf, obviously up until this pandemic, had been going on, or it's the longest running open mic poetry session in the country, if I'm not mistaken.
I would say easily in the country, and who knows, maybe the world.
Wow.
I mean, I can't imagine one anywhere else.
Well, there might be a European village or something obscure.
You're right.
Yeah.
But again, when you factor in World War II and stuff like that, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, it's hard to say.
But and it's impressive. Some of the people that have come to that. But I'll tell you what, the most interesting, famous person to go to that was, for me, was the Happy Hooker. The Xavier Hollander, the Happy Hooker.
No, I'm not very well read. I can barely read. I hope you know that.
Well,
these are pictures on this piece of paper. That's not actually letters.
Hieroglyphics, yeah. So back in the mid to late 70s, well, first off, New York City had a horrible police corruption problem. And there was they created something called the Knapp Commission, which was to investigate police corruption in New York. And one of the star witnesses in front of the Knapp Commission was the woman who ran the best brothel in New York at the time, and her name was Xavier Hollander.
Okay.
And her testimony, well, first off, it was fascinating, any madam is going to have real interesting stories to tell. What she'd done for most of her life had been, a prostitute and then a person who ran whorehouses. and she'd done very, very well financially because hers were high class poorhouses, you know. But she was shut down for a while, and there was too much scrutiny on her, and she couldn't really open another brothel.
Mm-hmm.
And she ended up writing a book called The Happy Hooker, and it became, for a couple of years, one of the best-selling books in the world.
Okay.
She had some just really, really weird stories, and this all ties in with Everett. So, one of the stories in her book, The Happy Hooker, she was Dutch, but she had relatives in South Africa.
Okay.
And at one point, she goes to stay with her relatives in South Africa, and I don't know if this story is true or not. It certainly helped sell the book.
Mm-hmm.
But she's talking about, or in the book, she writes about how her brother-in-law, her sister is married to a farmer, and so she's staying at the farm in South Africa, and it's miles from any kind of bar or anything, and there's she has no way to meet men, and this is before she ever was a prostitute. She just has a very, very strong sexual appetite. And she has no way to meet men. And there's a few laborers on the farm, but she says in the early 60s in South Africa, you know, the color line was something you couldn't cross. And they were all black, the laborers. Now, this is where it gets just really weird. So she wrote about how one night she's in winter in South Africa. There's a fire in the fireplace, and she's sitting by the fireplace with a drink, and her brother-in-law's German Shepherd goes and lies by the fire, and they make eye contact, and then...
Oh, my God. You're going to have to cut that out, Nick. I don't know if we can share that story.
Well, anyway, so, I don't think you can do any of this, but it certainly happened. So Everett, when he... Everett used to be at the bar in the afternoon, and when he was really loaded, he would start, pounding the bar with his bony little hand, and he'd be talking about how miserable his life is. But one of the things he would do repeatedly is go, "I can't get any." And so this happened 2 weeks after Everett died. This fella, you could tell he was European by how he was dressed and how he acted. He had a leather jacket on, but it was over his shoulders. His arms weren't in the sleeves.
Okay.
It looked weird. And he's with this woman. And it's on Sunday, and they've come just to see Everett. He's some kind of writer. And then he's telling me that his friend is a writer also. And he introduces me, and I see it's her. It's Xavier Hollander.
Yeah.
They've come, both of them have come just to meet Everett Maddox. Something else Everett used to do was he used to say, "I can't do anything right." Xavier Hollander, the happy hooker, is there. She's come to New Orleans with this fella, and one of the things they want to do is simply to meet Everett Maddox.
Yeah.
The fella who used to rant about how he couldn't get any. And I'm just thinking, here's a woman who the German Shepherd and wrote about it. And she comes to town just to meet this poor homeless poet, and he's dead. And I can see Everett in the grave going, "I can't do anything right." So that was, the homeless poet and the happy hooker.
That's a good one.
I hope you can use it.
We'll find a way.
Yeah. It's true, too. Every word of it.
We'll find a way to save that one, I guess. All this time, when I realized we haven't even gotten to how you've come to become the owner of the Maple Leaf Bar. You started as an employee, obviously.
before I was an employee, I was living upstairs, but I was working at the Bureau of Governmental Research. And at a certain point, when I became friends with Carl Brown, who was one of the owners, at the time there were 4 owners, a group of 4 guys, each owned 25% of the business. And then Carl owned 50% of the building. There was one fellow from Mississippi who owned 43%. And then there was a guy who owns 2 very successful bars in New York City who owned the other 7%. I can't explain how that happened.
Yeah.
The language professor from Mississippi and Carl Brown hated each other. And Carl wanted to get rid of him, and he was trying to come up with a way for me to buy out any of the others. But he wanted me to buy out Bill Odom. I took him seriously, and I was very interested, and I had the money to do it. The price was so incredibly cheap. If I told the Galactic Boys what...
Don't say it. We'll say it off air or something. This is also almost 35 years, or no, not 35 years ago. This was decades ago.
That's right, decades ago. So,
and it's not as big as this place. Like,
right.
There was a lot of baggage that came along with buying this place.
That's right. That's right. But
the worst thing you had to deal with at the time was a smelly Booker puke couch.
Well, there were so many junkies in the neighborhood. That was a bad thing. But that's another story. Carl had gotten me interested in buying into the place, but then things were dragging on, and at a certain point I realized, because I had real ideas on how to improve it, and there were a lot of things wrong with the place. There were a lot of drugs being sold there. There was there were a lot of problems, and he didn't seem to be aware of any of it. So, but at a certain point, I figured out years later, he had decided he didn't really want me in because I would change too much. But he still liked, having these planting lunches. He liked somebody to run around town with and eat well, and for a period of about 5 years. First, my dad got very sick and then ultimately died, and then the same with my mom. So I was preoccupied for 5 years. I wasn't really focused on much, except I was going up to see each of them. They were, my mom was in Connecticut, my dad was in D.C., and I spent a lot of time just going up to see him. And after my mom's funeral, now I'm not preoccupied like I was, and I'm ready now to move forward. And at a certain point, I was ready. I mean, it seemed like Carl was not interested, and I had to. I wasn't going to tend bar for the rest of my life. I had to do something. The owner in New York, Jim Stratton, he had come down that spring, and he had said, "This place is dying." And he gave me his card, and he said, "It needs someone like you. When you're ready, give me a call." And well, actually, he had done that before my folks had died.
Okay.
But I still had the card. So I tried a couple more times with Brown, and then I just called up Stratton, and he said, "I'll sell to you next week if you have the money." And I actually did.
All right.
And so in the bylaws of the corporation, there was this specific way where somebody had to announce that they were selling shares, and Stratton didn't get it 100% right. And Carl was he was a lawyer, but he'd also written it.
Okay.
And he'd mostly written it in a complicated way
to protect himself and his 25%.
Right.
Yeah.
When he got the notification from Stratton that he wanted to sell to me, Carl, he was so angry, he couldn't speak to me for about a week. He would be, you know, you could tell he was like, he just wouldn't say anything, but he was so angry. And he finally, the first thing, we're sitting there, you know, we went to a restaurant, and we're just sitting there, and I'm waiting for him to, you know, open up, whatever. And he finally goes, "I see you went behind my back." And I said, "Carl, you know, I'm in my 30s. I'm not going to tend bar. I have to do something. If this doesn't work, let me know. I'll move on."
Yeah.
But you know, this is what I'd like to do. I'd like to give it a shot. And I guess he decided after a couple of years that it was a good thing, but he wasn't happy about it.
No.
Really getting him, first getting myself in to the place, that was important. And then, I mean, there was a lot that needed to be done. You know, the amount of theft there was crazy. And then the junkies and the drug dealers. There was a lot of drug selling, and of course, the Maple Leaf wasn't that different from a lot of places in town. I mean, you know,
How do you mean?
there was a little crew of, say, cocaine dealers, and I would see them at half the bars I went to. They would do the same circuit I would. Like if I was going out, you know, I would hit, you know, say 5 bars in uptown. Well, I would see these
Same
guys
yeah.
in the same night. I'd see them at every place. They kind of had the same circuit as me, except I was going for leisure and they were going for business. And I don't even know. I'm not in touch with that lifestyle, but I assume it's that it's as embedded as it was.
It's not the same town it was, 30 years ago.
Right.
So.
Yeah, the coke.
Again, not. Yeah, I'm not involved with a lot of that scene either myself. But
we both
from what I saw, 10 plus years ago, it is much different than it is these days. Absolutely.
I mean, it pops up, of course, but back in the let's say all through the 80s to the mid 90s, just the amount of cocaine, the crime had gotten so bad, not just in New Orleans, but specifically in West Carrollton,
Okay.
from Oak Street to the Parish Line. And it was horrible, the amount of just the armed robberies, just all the crime. And so at a certain point, we started hiring police officers to do details. A lot of places had used police officers, and some of it was simply, they never said this, but it was kind of like so that people, they would have some way to help people get out of tickets and stuff like that. We had them so people wouldn't get shot or robbed. There was one officer that we had, and he was a very nice guy, but he was an absolute mess. So back in my bartending days, there was one night when it's the end of the night, and I've already paid him and everything, and I'm just waiting I'm doing my cash and all this, and he's pretty loaded already, and not really from what I had served him, but he used to bring his own liquor and whatever else. And so he's trying to get my attention, and I go over, and he goes, "Left a little treat for you." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Go in the storeroom and take a look." And I go back there, and it's this line of powder. I mean, it's ridiculously long. And it's like, and I really didn't know this guy very well. And it's one of those things, I mean, well, I didn't do it anyway. but you're scared to say no,
Yeah.
as well as scared to say yes.
No, absolutely. It's scary. Yeah.
It's like, so I didn't know what to do, but when I came out and I said, well, thank you very much, and then I said, I had a problem with it, and I had to go through some counseling, and I can't be around it. And he was going, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. But anyway, he ended up. I don't know if you remember the story. There was a New Orleans cop who was guarding the cocaine warehouse.
I don't remember this. No.
That was quite a few years ago. But he ended up doing something like 8 years. His first day out of jail, he comes to the Maple Leaf, and I see him, and I'm going, "Why are you here? I mean, you're not supposed to.
You're rehabilitated. What's the big deal?
You're not supposed to be in a bar, you know." And but he wanted, he had nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And so and he was coming by, but he's the guy that this happened the year the Bears were in the Super Bowl here
85?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was working the detail at the Maple Leaf, and it was a Friday night when Rockin' Doopsie Sr. was playing at the Maple Leaf, and the place is packed with tourists.
It's a king right there.
Yeah. And so this officer is there. He's already hammered. Well, I noticed at a certain point that something's wrong with how he looks, but I couldn't really place it. But then this guy comes up. He comes up to the bar. This guy is. It wasn't that far off from Mardi Gras either. There were, people in all these.
Yeah, late January, early February, right?
Yeah, they're dressed. Well, there are a lot of people really dressed weird. There was one guy who'd been in long johns. He comes in long johns, with the trapdoor trouser and I mean, and we're thinking, all right, well, it's the season. He comes up, he comes to the bar, he's dancing and doing all this stuff, and he's wearing a New Orleans police officer's hat. And then I realized, oh, that's John. I won't say the guy's name. That's Officer Smith's hat. And well, anyway, more and more he starts. He's missing more and more of his clothes. And what he was doing was selling them.
Oh man.
He sold his. He had a nice leather jacket. The police. It was cold, and he sold his leather jacket. The guy with the hat comes dancing all back the same way. He's got his badge. I got the badge back.
Okay.
The guy was, he was really upset, and he's telling me what he paid and all this, and I thought he was lying.
So, hey, what are you going to do? Call the cops? What's going to happen? Yeah.
I bought the badge back.
Okay. All right.
I think I paid $50, gave him 50.
Wow.
I think the officer got more than that.
Yeah.
But the guy also, at a certain point, he understood he'd crossed the line, and he
taking advantage of a drunk cop.
Right. And so I got the badge back. But, and the reason I know it was resold was we had an officer who, he was rank, as they say. He at the time, he was coordinating the police details for several of the uptown bars. And I went to him to tell him that we couldn't use this officer anymore. And it wasn't just this incident. It was a whole series of them.
Well, any one of these incidents is a reason those are all red flags.
Right. And so he starts laughing when he hears about the badge. And he says, oh, we got the badge back. And I say, what do you mean? And he said that there was a cocaine dealer in Chicago that had been busted.
Oh, man.
And the badge was found when they searched the place. And he was telling me, I think he had taken the call from the Chicago Police Department. And
wow.
You know, was some, did one of your officers lose a badge?
Oh man.
But that was the 80s in New Orleans.
Yeah, people don't realize that this was like the Wild West in a lot of ways.
It was, yeah.
Well, however great a story that was, what year was it when you actually took ownership of the Maple Leaf?
Let's see, I bought in as an owner. It was April Fool's Day of '92.
Huh. Tricked them, yeah.
Yeah, I got 25% of the
Okay.
business, and none of the building.
Okay.
And I was able over time to, buy everything.
Can you say who the other guys were?
Yeah.
I mean, I think John Parsons was one of them.
John
is that right?
Parsons.
He's a great guy. He comes to Tipitina's, loves the Cajun music for sure.
The influence he's had on the presentation of live music, because
Regional live music.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'll use this as an example because I've said this over the years to some of the hardcore Tipitina's fans, and they'll say, "Oh no, there was a Zydeco at Tips before it was at the Maple Leaf." It would be like once or twice a year, but John showcased it. It was a weekly showcase.
Yeah, our Fado Dough featuring Bruce Daggerpont started at the Maple Leaf.
That's correct. Bruce started there, and when
Did it for like 5 years at the Maple Leaf before it came here.
That's right. Yeah, so he would. It wasn't just like, here's a night of showcasing, Cajun music. It was like, we're going to give a stage for Cajun music once a week for years, and it was that way with the Zydeco, and he had some of the old New Orleans rhythm and blues guys, and he'd given them a weekly showcase of Spotlight. So he was very important in the preservation and presentation of the local music.
Absolutely.
And when I was taking over the music, I told John at the time, I said, "Good Lord, I hope I come in at 25% of the quality that you did."
Yeah.
And I think when I told him that, it surprised him. But the music had been presented before, but it had not been given, a weekly stage where, say, Cajun musicians year-round would know that there was a possibility to play the Maple Leaf or play a venue in New Orleans every week.
Yeah, a true residency.
That's right.
Sure.
And it was the same with the Zydeco, and there were the other stuff too.
Well, and look at how it's built into, how the Maple Leaf is these days with, the Rebirth on Tuesday is one of the most hallowed nights of music in New Orleans.
That's right.
It is world famous without a doubt.
John's ear was so good. He was able to pick Rebirth, which, now is so influential. But at the time, there were a lot of brass bands.
Yeah, they were just kids, right?
Yeah, but he really, if you look at the bands that he picked over time, as an example, so many won Grammys, and of course, two of them were Doopsie and Rebirth.
Yeah,
but there were others,
Well, you hear about like those old Iguanas show. The Iguanas shows at the Maple Leaf, how historic that time period was for live music in New Orleans, for sure, especially that show in that place. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's it's a shame right now. Live music in New Orleans is a struggle, and I remember at one point when there was something like on a weekend 40 places with music, and it annoyed me. And I was worried about overexposure and all this, but today there might be 5 places on a weekend. I wish it was back to 40.
Well, there are more music venues in town than there were before, ever in its history. No matter what anyone says, we're running really long on time. I'm really sorry. I have so many more things that I want to get to. I want to talk about and we're not going to have time, I don't think, just because I know we're going to run out of space on the tape, as it were. We're running out of time for sure. I want to talk to you about Saints games. You are one of the popes. For those of you who are not Saints fans, go ahead and turn this off. You can stop watching. But Hank is one of the popes, and you're the you, aren't you? And
yes,
the Bless You Boys.
There's three of us as popes, and one of the they're called bishop's mitres, but those pointy hats that the Pope wears.
Yeah.
One says bless on it. The middle one, that's me. My pointy little hat says you. And then the third guy, his hat says boys, because, of course, the New Orleans Saints, I don't know, 30 years ago, they came up with this song. It was, I think, WWL, but they were trying to just advertise their TV station. But they had this thing called Bless You Boys.
Like a catchphrase.
Yeah, and there was a song, and the song was, the production value was very good. They had a very good band playing the song, and it was Bless You Boys, and just, all these quick shots of iconic New Orleans scenes, and it would end up, Bless You Boys at the end of it, and there'd be the Saints. Oh, the Saints would be flashed in there repeatedly. And they were mostly advertising, I believe, their news team or whatever.
More than likely, yeah.
And the Pope's thing came because they're the Saints.
Obviously, we all figured out why. that's why. But yeah, aside from that, I'm going to run through some highlights as well, or at least a couple of things. After the famous Steve Gleason blocked punt, he came to the Maple Leaf to hang out. He was a regular at the Maple Leaf, obviously, before came down with ALS. Another one of your regulars.
He was, I would say, he was more like a friend of Frenchie's.
Yeah.
And but he was there several times. I wouldn't say he was a regular,
But a normal guy that would appreciated good local music.
That's
that
right.
Would come hang out for sure. There again, I got so many things that I want to ask you about, or even just talk about. Hankies or Hank tops. I wore my best Hank top for this interview. I will ask you one question, at least from a bar owner's perspective, something to make this seem as if it's educational. With all your years in running a joint, music joint, what do you think is one of the biggest mistakes most club owners or bar owners have?
Well, as far as club owners go, let's say you pay a band $1,000 and you only do $750 in ticket sales, and then they'll go, but we sold a lot of drinks. You're in trouble if your admission doesn't pay your entertainment. And what most people don't understand is it's 3 to 1. So if you spend $1, you have to ring $3. And so if you lose,
that's even cutting it tighter than I would probably recommend even.
Right. If you pay $250 out, the first $750 you ring, it's only $250. That's what your profit is, if you're lucky. So I would say for if you are presenting entertainment, every time a place has gotten into trouble, they just don't get that.
Yeah. Yeah, they're paying the bands with the money that they need to keep the bar open.
That's right.
Basically,
the function of the entertainment is to draw a larger crowd, and you should have it organized so that your entertainment is not paid for by you. It's paid for by your larger crowd. They pay to see the entertainment, and then pay extra to have the drinks. And
sure.
that's where most people they don't get it.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Hank Staples, owner of the Maple Leaf Bar. We have a thing that I want to give you. That you're going to be the first person to receive this. And, God, man, I don't know how much time we're going to have. We better not be losing all this. But right here, you are the first recipient of a certificate suitable for framing. So congratulations for participating in the currently named All Right broadcast, Henry Lee Staples III.
Actually, the fourth.
The fourth? Son of a bitch. All right, we'll take that up with my informant who told me you were the third Henry Lee Staples. So you can throw this one in the trash when we're done, or we can just get a Sharpie and
I
cover
mean, I
it.
don't mind. I have no problem with the Sharpie.
That's okay. That's okay. We'll do it in your father's memory then. All right. Congratulations. You are the recipient of a certificate suitable for framing.
Well,
so
thank you so much.
I'm going to go ahead and give you a little folder, too, to keep with you. One more thing that I think I have to do. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, Hank Staples of the Maple Leaf Bar. Thank you so much, Hank.
Thank you. Cheers.
All right, cheers. Here, I'll give you a clink.
Boom.
All right.